welcome to discussions of music, healing, and consciousness with your hosts, Chris Noble and Bill Paratzman. On this podcast, Chris and I offer a spontaneous, ongoing conversation about how music is intertwined with healing and consciousness. Our first season helped lay the foundation and build some of the superstructure for what we want to do here in Season 2, where we'll be welcoming some intriguing guests, going deeper into ancient mysteries and wisdom, and cultivating your background knowledge and curiosity. We hope these discussions will inspire your own study and practice of the musical and healing arts, and that your contribution to advancing world consciousness will be satisfying for you and transformative to those around you. Let's get started. So, I was talking with this guy who shall remain nameless, but he asked me an interesting question when I said, the effects of music happen whether you hear it in your ears, like vibration on the eardrums, or whether you remember it. And we got to talking about that, and he initially said, "No way, Bill. Remember that old Bose commercial of the guy in the Barca Lounger being blown away by the sound pressure coming at him, right?" And I know we've all been in the room where, I went to hear Owl City or something, and the sound was so huge that my internal organs were jumping around, right? So that's not what I mean. What I mean is like the internal physiology of the stuff, whether it's a frequency or a symphony or whatever. Well, so where was I going with this? I've been wondering recently, Chris, if we could have some way of measuring the internal response to music that we remember. And I don't know if that's possible in fMRI or not. I mean, I'm just curious if there's a way to measure that.
Wasn't there that musician slash doctor? I'm totally going to blank on his name. I think he's a fellow Canadian guy who did some experiments on sting and his brain.
Oh, would that be This Is Your Brain on Music, Daniel Levitin? Yeah. I've forgotten. I read the book, but it's gone, like it was years ago. So remind me.
Well, I also don't quite fully remember that study, but I do remember that when you said CAT scan and MRI, I mean, that's exactly what they did with Sting's brain. They tried to get Sting to improvise something vocally while under the CAT scan, MRI, and other different things. I can't remember which one. But either way, they're measuring the brain and what it does when you're improvising and writing versus singing something you've already written.
Yeah.
But singing something that makes you feel a certain way. And it was interesting what the results were, which I don't remember. This was a study done a long time ago. Audience, if you guys remember, let us know in the comments. But essentially, that's the only time I've really heard of someone going into what does your brain look like when it is, experiencing music / creating some form of music.
So in the creative process, it was like you could watch him thinking, essentially.
Yeah, which was pretty cool. And so you're definitely looking at the right brain creativity when improvising something. But to measure, that next level of impact with music, does it even reside in the brain? Would that be the place to?
Well, yeah, that's where I was. I mean, I kind of went there with this guy a little bit because I wanted to see what he would say. And I think you're onto something. So if it were me and I had the right equipment for this, I'd be measuring consciousness. I'd want to know, and not so much localized. Is it the head? Is it the heart? Is it the gut? I'd want to know like how a person remembering music experiences that music. And I know physiologically, like they can look at brain chemistry and stuff for that. But I think there's something more. I want to know, the moreness of it. How would we get to that? And consciousness, which, can't be really measured or monitored or visualized or anything like that, is, I suppose, I mean, if we had the Dalai Lama remember Happy Birthday, I would suspect his consciousness scan would be different than if you or me remembered Happy Birthday, right?
Right. And that goes into the whole individual, aspect of life, reality, and of course the subjective nature of music and art,
Right.
it feels differently for everyone. But I mean, that goes for even, I've been diving into like ideas recently of what is even truth. Our podcast we did our episode before this one with our guest Maury definitely got me thinking a lot about, this idea of even seeking truth and understanding and knowledge through something like science. It's always changing, and that's the thing we got to remember and remind ourselves. I have to remind myself, certainly, this idea of even truth is subjective, and it is totally based on the individual and what the individual wants to find as a truth. And we even have that some like I know I have a bias of like I'm looking for reasons that binaural beats do work.
Yes, well, of course, right?
you
We want to support our beliefs,
know
or like scientists, we want to test our hypothesis, right?
but how far can science even go, um versus us just I think we said this before we started recording, where we can be told scientifically that binaural beats don't work. However, we know they do based on experience and also just a feeling. Like there's just something in me, and maybe that's even more into the 432 hertz side of things, but there's a feeling within me that just says, I know this works. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
then like we're also, I guess it's like I want to measure these things too. And where do we go? Where's the balance between needing to prove it, measure it, showcase that it does totally work versus just embodying the fact of like, well, I know it works and I'm just going to go with that. And I know there's a balance because both are important.
So I have a mind-blowing question that I've been trying to ask myself. I'll ask you.
All right.
Let's say I'm uh, I'm listening to Beethoven played a Moonlight Sonata back in the day, right? In a room with 40 other people, and Beethoven's at the piano, and he can't hear what he's playing, but he knows the music. It's in his head, and all of us are hearing it, the same music that he knows, and all of us are interpreting it in our own individual way. And then we all go home and we remember what we heard. Do we remember it in the same tuning reference frequency in which it was played, or does that matter?
That's a really good question. I'm going to go and say that it almost doesn't matter, only because it's maybe it's more important what the memory does for you versus the specific frequency that you're remembering, if that makes sense. Like the feeling of that experience might be more important than the details of the experience, whether it was music of 432 hertz versus 440 versus if they threw some binaural beats into that situation versus not. um Even though I'm literally someone who writes and composes these things because I do believe that they help and they do work, I'm also acknowledging that I'm just thinking about that situation. You see a genius like Beethoven in real life. Are you experiencing something a bit more than what we can measure as a particular frequency or a
That's
binaural
yeah.
beat,
That's why I was asking,
right?
because
Or is
the
there something
energy
bigger?
of the extra energy, the non-perceptible, right?
Will we ever be able to measure that spiritual consciousness component of what happens when you witness someone like a Beethoven in real life, in their genius? I've had many music moments in my own life, not seeing a Beethoven, but certainly seeing my own equivalents of that in real life, and being left just
Oh yeah,
as if
and I'd
I,
suggest, people that watched the Tennyson King, that watched you, had that experience, right? You
sure.
are an infinite, expandable part of that memory and that music that was offered, which um, I guess maybe what we're going to here is that the music itself, the stuff that we all labor and put our love into and compose and construct and deliver, maybe that's just a way of being able to leave a signature in the memories of the listeners that they can look back on later and grab onto. And
Hmm.
it's not necessary that they grab it exactly the way that we played it or performed it or wanted it to be, but they grabbed enough of it to give them that experience when they look back later and say, "Oh man, I got to hear Beethoven last night," right? Or Taylor Swift or Chris. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. That's, I mean, this is just like, it's a great question because it opens up this whole reality of what our experiences are, and what's really happening when we experience something that we would consider magical or spiritual or very special, where you're left
Significant, yeah.
for the rest of your life,
And I'm totally good with the subjective nature of that,
yeah.
because what I want for my music when you hear it might be something totally different than what you got and how wonderful that was,
Hmm.
right? And what I want means nothing in the ultimate big picture of it all, right?
Yeah, especially with something like music, right? Once it's out there, and you can't do anything about that.
Yeah,
It's going to be interpreted the way it's going to be interpreted. And as an artist, it's such a practice of letting go, that we all, struggle with, certainly. Especially the artists typically are the kinds of people that, want something to be conveyed in a very particular way and received in a very particular way. But we all
not me.
know.
I gave up on that a long time ago, man. But
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think a lot of more successful artists have done that, and I
yeah,
think that's a big part of the whole artist journey, is to get to that point
truly,
of being able to let go of that, and relinquish the perfectionism and the
yeah.
this is how it's supposed to be, and this goes for anything. This goes for inventions and yeah,
And
anything
and
else.
I say that with great respect because classical musicians in general are all about reproducing the genuine artifact.
Yeah,
I get that, and that's such a noble endeavor, right? It's so incredibly honorable. But even then, people are going to hear it how they're going to hear it.
yeah.
Read any criticism, and you'll see that it did or didn't work, right?
Yeah, I mean, I saw Vivaldi's Four Seasons like 2 years ago for the second time, and just absolutely adored it in a new way. And it's not at all the way I would have experienced it when Vivaldi himself was, performing it with his
Right?
orchestra on the violin and all that. Like, it's just always going to be different, even when it's done verbatim.
Yeah,
100,
yeah,
200, 300 years later, it's still going to be different.
right. And that's cool. At least I think it's cool. I don't know. There may
I
be
think it's
people
great.
that there may be jurists that disagree with me, and that's fine because we need everyone's current understanding is welcome.
Yeah.
We talk about placebo effect and all of that. I don't know. Is it a placebo effect or is it just instantly customized to however I need it in that moment?
That's the
You know?
ineffable side of music, right? And the
Yeah,
arts. It's just, I mean, even with movies or things like that, like, depending on where I am at in this particular present moment, I will receive a story very differently than the day before, even, or the day after.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like, where are you finding me right here, right now? Is this exactly what I need to see or hear, in this moment? And in that moment, you could be going through something so specific where that same piece of music will make you feel all these things towards your grandmother, as an example, because there's something she's experiencing right in that moment you're hearing it. And then next week, you could feel the same emotions, but then completely transferred to an ex-girlfriend or a business partner, whatever, you know what I mean? It's
yeah,
just,
yeah.
it's like whatever you as an individual are moving through is really going to dictate what you're feeling and how you experience something as well. It's a infinite cocktail and recipe every single time for every single person, which is why it's this like infinite individual experience.
And it's so a pastor friend of mine likes to say that when you encounter paradox, you're in the presence of spirituality, right?
That's good.
Right. And
I like
so
that.
in the paradox of two of us hearing the Moonlight Sonata, uh, with Beethoven playing it, and then going home and then getting together the next day and talking about it, we might have different perceptions. They might be opposite perceptions. Um, but the opposite perceptions themselves might be the spiritual invitation. And without having heard it two different ways, we wouldn't share that moment, right? And be able to explore what consciously, how our consciousness meters were measuring as we were listening to him play, right? I mean, this is all so totally hypothetical, but there aren't ways of explaining it, yet.
Well, I'll throw another mind bender one at you then. So what about the idea of time only truly existing, if it even does at all, in the third dimension? as we go into higher dimensions of reality, time ceases to be linear and exists. Therefore, there's no past and there's no future. It's only the present. So when you've written a piece of music and you perform that music, you also, in a way, have to understand that it is going to mesh with all time, all at once. And in a way, that what Beethoven wrote and how it affects us in the present time, in a weird sense, he's he created in that present moment, in a sense, like an infinite ripple effect throughout time and space, as we do with every creation and every possible action we ever take. So that's a whole other, I mean, I don't know where your brain goes with that one, but if there's no past or future, only the present, where does that take music and the experience of that, right?
So you teed this up perfectly because I have been thinking about that very thing. Ishtak Bentov, who wrote a book called Stalking the Wild Pendulum back in the 70s, I think, citizen scientist. He anticipated quantum physics and some other things. Talks about how the pendulum swings. And if you've been to the Natural History Museum where they have the Foucault pendulum that's swinging very slowly and it spins, you can see it knocking little pegs down as the earth turns. So his postulate about that, should we call it a theory? His theory
Sure.
was that as the pendulum approaches its apex, is that the right word for it? The end of the swing,
Yeah.
it slows down. And as it slows down, it slows down, it slows down, it's getting ready to go the other direction, right? It slows down and eventually it will stop. And in the moment where it stops and changes direction, time disappears or time expands. You can choose either one. Time expands to infinity at that moment of the pendulum's not moving, which is an infinitesimally small moment, but it does exist. We can postulate that it does exist. So in that moment of rest, time expands to infinity. There is no time. And also in that moment, there is no space, because if you need to be able to cross from here to there in the 3D world, it takes time. A vibration takes some time. They're measured over time, right? But if time is gone, you can't have vibration. You can have energy, you can have potential, but um, you can't have time.
And I guess music, because music literally is time, right?
Yeah, because music happens. So here, I think, is the answer to your question. If something like the Moonlight Sonata is a consciousness tool, then it doesn't exist in time. However, to transmit that tool from Beethoven to us takes a certain amount of time. But once we have it, time is no longer required. And we can say this with some level of certainty because to have the physical effect in 3D of the Moonlight Sonata, all one has to do is remember the first note. And the physical effect, bang, is completely there with no time at all. Or in that moment. Now that could be called quantum entanglement with Beethoven. I don't know. There's names for that. But I think Bentov's perception on this was accurate, because what music ought to do, Mozart said, was music ought to prepare us for silence. And let's say that in that silence, time also expands to infinity and all movement stops. And if that's the doorway to 5D consciousness, yeah, I'm in, you know,
Sounds
bring
like
it,
fun.
right? So, I mean, time is necessary to communicate in 3D, but it's not necessarily a component of quantum gravity or whatever we're going to call the new thing, right?
Yeah.
Music is necessary, vibration is necessary to communicate in 3D, but to realize the effects of it takes no time.
Yeah. And then you've got, like you said, quantum entanglement, which eliminates the necessity for time and
Or
everything's
the
in
strata for the communication to take place, that goes
yeah.
away too.
Yeah. But you can I wonder what music would be like in these higher dimensions. I feel like it still exists.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean? Just it must be,
In a timeless non-instant,
how does that work?
right? It's like
3D brains can't figure that one
can't
out.
figure that one. It's better than the Matrix. You don't even have to wait for the download,
Right. It's
right?
already
It's
there.
just you're already there.
Hmm.
which is really cool. I wonder what it's like to create in that space.
Well, I guess creation just takes on a whole new definition, or at least a whole new manifestation, of
Yeah,
what that.
there's a better word. Creation
There's
implies a time scale. Manifestation, it's instant.
well, the English language in general is very, very time based when you think about it.
Yeah, we are
Every
bound by it.
word and yeah, construct of the English language specifically has to do with a very material, time based reality.
Yeah,
So the thing is we won't have those words because they just aren't designed in our language. As we ascend, as our consciousness ascends, as our vibration collectively increases, we're going to have to, really adapt our language or full on invent new languages that, or actually probably re-examine some older ones that were on that vibe, that wavelength, that describe time in a very different sense, in a higher dimensional sense, that describe all these things in a very different dimensional sense, because this whole podcast is just going to be is in a way a big paradoxical loop because our language is so limited to discuss these. We're talking about higher dimensional ways of perceiving music and creation and all this, how the English language literally constantly hits a wall
yeah,
because it's materialism, third dimensional base, right,
yeah,
time base.
yeah. And
So
part of the beauty of music is that it does improve us in 3D.
yeah.
And these frequencies, the mono frequency we've talked about and different things, they do improve us in 3D, and that's great. But the whole the, the warp and woof, I think, is the right term for it. But the weave that we're in is doesn't translate. However, there is something out there, that we can imagine that it is translated backward from. This is where quantum gravity blows my mind. They can look back on 3D from a different place and say, oh, well, 3D is a hologram of that. The real thing is this. And, by the process of reduction, finding the cube root of that other thing, we can arrive at what we are in 3D. Um, that's kind of an oversimplified mathematical
And even
version
that's
of
not
something.
that simple.
Yeah, and it's not, but think about it for a second. So,
Yeah.
and I'm satisfied. I mean, I'm really happy to be working here in 3D right now. I would like to improve consciousness. There's certain things I'd prefer to not have to feel, but I'm as convinced as I ever have been that we can't think our way into this. We really do have to feel our way into it. And as facilitators of the feelings, you and me have this sort of awesome burden of offering the best ride we can to people who are ready for our music.
Yeah. And I totally agree, Bill. I mean, it's a privilege and it's an honor to be on this journey, of course, and it's so much fun.
Really,
Um,
sometimes it just feels like a slow motion train wreck.
yeah, also that too.
Yeah,
But
right. It's still this paradox, right?
as artists, we love to suffer, so it's just our it's in our nature.
Yeah. What do you think about this thing that's? Oh, I interrupted you. Why don't you finish your thought, dude? Sorry about that.
You know what? It's all good. It has left my brain. So actually no, sorry. That was what it was all about. Was our brain versus so I've been re-examining. I go in waves with human design for our audience. If you don't know what human design is, it's a really interesting way at, well, what it sounds like is how are we made up? How are we designed? How do we function? It's a really beautiful practical way of looking at the spiritual sort of energetic components of how we're all individually made up.
Yeah, it
So
was cool. I looked at that, like Uber personality stuff.
yeah, I really personally, and it's like with all these things, they're going to resonate differently with everyone. For me, human design is just I found it a eerily accurate way of looking at how I operate as a human being, and it just takes your birthday, which sounds like an astrology chart, but it combines astrology with the I Ching and quantum physics and a whole bunch of other stuff. It's really amazing. So anyway, I've been going back into that, especially over this weekend, and I've been looking into these very deep aspects of my chart, and they talk about how really with all of the ways that you are with human design, one of the most important things is to learn how to listen to your emotions, and your emotions truly are that GPS that dictate what do you want? Where do you want to go? You don't need to know necessarily what that even looks like as a destination, but you know based on your feelings and your emotions, um, at all times what is the best direction, what is the most in high alignment for you, essentially. And so you were talking about this whole, like everything we're talking about in a way can't be fully understood by our brain. And I think that's what human design is reminding me of right now, is that it shouldn't be our brain leading. Actually, it should be our emotions leading. Our emotions are so important, and we're emotional beings for a reason. We need our emotions. And if anything, not just our emotions, but feeling in general is a lot of the time going to be the information and the indicators and the, let's say, like the signposts for where we should be going in our lives. And these are intuitive hits or downloads or pieces of information given to us by, the your higher consciousness or the universe, whatever you really want to call that. And ironically, or interestingly, it really comes down to how we feel about everything in our life, and then using our brain to take that information and do what we want with it. But if we're going to be making decisions and guiding ourselves through this life, it's ironically, it's all about our feeling. It's kind of the opposite way we've been taught. It's all about how we feel, because our brain is only going to process what happened in the past. Exactly. This is right up Hawkins' his alley. This is why I'm thinking about this, probably is because you brought up him and this idea of how we think through everything. It's really got to be it's got to be flipped. It really
It's
needs to
got
be
to be
flipped.
flipped. It's a real
You know,
no-brainer.
it is a no-brainer. It's got to get that brain not out of there, but reevaluate how we work with it.
Yeah,
And the
use
more
it for
I
what it's good at, right?
Exactly. It's a computer processor. It processes information. It uses logic. It uses all these things. But if you want to move forward in your life at any standpoint, you gotta not use your brain to do that, because the brain is only going to give you information based off of past experiences. So that does not create a very conducive environment for new things
Yeah,
and for
unless you're Einstein,
innovation. 100%. You're
you
taking
know.
risks constantly.
Yeah, and sticking your hand in a lot of fires.
Yeah.
I love what you're saying here. There's one of the things that's really difficult about the brain is that it wants stuff, and we like to say that our levels of consciousness improve based upon what we want, right? And I kind of get that, because we all want to be safe, right? There's certain desires we have that are about survival, and that's great. But at some point, it tops out. And once you are safe and you have a job and you have the McMansion and all the toys, what do you want next, right? And what's the Buddhist concept about attachment? Attachment is the root of all suffering.
Yeah. That's why they get rid of all their stuff.
Yeah, which is yeah, and that's not really too new because that's what Jesus told the guy who wanted to follow him too. It's like go sell everything and follow me, and he couldn't do it. He didn't get it, but he wasn't telling him to sell everything. He was telling him metaphorically to lose your attachment, right, to stuff or to whatever it is that's holding you back. And a lot of us are very attached. Me too. I am very attached to what's going on up here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of it that makes a lot of sense to me, and it's not so easy to stop. On the other hand, when paradox comes along, or as Maury would say, when my current understanding changes, it kind of rocks me, and it can be scary. But I'm learning more and more that the attachment to what I think is perhaps where the work takes place, right? I can have desires. I mean, I can have a desire for enlightenment, right? Who wouldn't want that? Uh, Pretty decent desire. I don't know if it's going to happen. So, downscale a little bit, have a desire for something that's a little bit more achievable, Bill. Right? There's the pattern match here at work. It's like, dude, you're going to get enlightenment, but maybe not tomorrow. So why don't we focus on this? you know, get a little bit more down to earth. That's fine. I'm good with that. Uh, Brain does a good job at that. But if the brain is holding me back, that's a problem for me because I feel something is possible that the brain says is impossible means that I'm in the paradox right at that moment. Like that's spirituality knocking on the door, dude.
Yeah, I mean that for me is where I'm currently at, is this coming into an understanding and an acceptance of this brain, you could call it brain heart coherence or
Yeah,
brain
good. Well
body,
said. Yeah.
brain body coherence, maybe even more broadly, brain intuition coherence, intuition being not coming from the brain, not a logical thought, but a feeling, that knowing perhaps of, I just know I'm meant to quit this job and start something that's just truer to my soul and to who I am. Brain goes, are you insane? Are you crazy? Do you know how much risk is involved? Do you know how much potentially you could lose? Do you realize this, that, and that, and this, and this, and that? And that's what the brain does so well. And it's great for that when we can use it, sparingly. Otherwise, it's going to do is give you the reasons not to do something. And, and then the flip side is if you go full decisions with no brain, that also can lead to sticky situations as well. And I've learned that as well, where I go full intuition with no logic and no brain. And that doesn't work either. You need to find your balance, and everyone's got their own balance. And every situation probably has its own balance too. But yeah, I mean it's so interesting, this like this constant I feel like for me reprogramming of using my brain, but just almost relearning how to use it and where to not perhaps use it, and allow these thoughts and these intuitions and these downloads to be a stronger guiding force in the decisions we make and the path that we take in our life. At least I'm trying. Yeah, work in
No, but
progress.
I'm with you. I'm reading Hawkins again. Friend sent me the book, and I love that he says we spend so much of our time like inventing thoughts that are based on feelings. And if we stopped doing that, we could open our pattern matchers to other kinds of things, like release their power to do other stuff. And I know all of us do this. I'm like, I hold on to feelings. And his point is if you can transform the feeling, then you release the pattern matcher from having to think about it. So, I mean, I've got historical feelings, that date way back. And to be able to process those, which I do with music, helps me to release them a little bit at a time and free up the pattern matcher. And it's not cognitive behavioral therapy. It's not immersion therapy, any kind of thing. Although those are ways that it does work, I think in the clinical world. But Hawkins says it's easier. You just got to get into those emotions and uh, and release them. Not paper them over, not stuff them, but release them. And to do that, you got to know what they are in the first place. See, how many emotions did Brene Brown find? We all know like three, and now she's got an atlas of 87. So you got to find them first of all and identify them clearly, and then you know what you've got, and you can start releasing them and releasing the accumulation of thought that goes with them and bogs you down when you're stuck in your head, as we like to say.
I think another exercise that's really helpful is also writing down like what do you even want? What do
Oh,
you
absolutely. Like we did that time, right?
yeah,
Yeah. What's your desire?
what are your desires? They're changing all the time, and that's okay. That's why it's important though to get, relatively clear on them. I mean, different people will bring things into reality differently, and that's definitely a thing for sure. That's why human design is so helpful because it helps you
Right. Yep.
realize what type of person you are
Yep.
and in what way sort of best suits your disposition to bring things into reality or to manifest things. And that's helpful to know how do you do that best. But ultimately, we're all kind of on that path of sure we can figure out how we want to manifest, but what do we even want to manifest? What do we even want to bring into this reality? A lot of the time we usually know better what we don't want than even what we do want. We think we know what we want until we really get into it. I mean, I experience this all the time. Even just today, this morning, I'm doing yet another exercise of writing down what I'm looking for right now, what I want to bring into my life. And I look back at older notes. I'm like, it's always changing, always, always.
Sure.
So it's good to get in touch with that, and just be more on the current pulse of where you're at with what you want, because I don't think I check that pulse enough, and that's what I'm realizing right now is
Yeah.
something
I
that
see what you mean. Yeah.
I want to check that pulse more often.
Definitely. The pendulum will swing. And the next time it's shifted, maybe radically. Maybe
Yeah,
sometimes it shifts radically, which I think I would appreciate.
yeah.
These little tiny incremental improvements are fine.
Nice to have some big fun surprises.
Yeah, it would be, wouldn't it though? And I
Yeah,
suppose that, even now as he's saying this, that big stuff's on its way.
Well, as I'm reminded that the universe can create anything, and it doesn't really matter what, big, small. It's like it doesn't matter if it's creating a penny on the sidewalk or a McMansion. It's all the same. It's creation. It's kind of just one or a zero. It's there. It's not. And it's really our own minds, our brains, that are the one limiting what we bring in, which is always the infuriating part of
Isn't
this
it though?
journey is
We're telling
manifest.
ourselves it's impossible, and so it
Well,
is.
I know, and the most challenging, I would say, for me personally, is it really is all about believing before you're seeing. But we're brought up yet again, we're brought up in this way of no, 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 I need to see it to believe it. And that's the hilarious irony with manifestation, is it's all about believing it before you see it. And I'm still on a journey of what that even looks like, sounds like, and is in action. Because when I'm trying to bring certain things in, I don't believe it. You know, there's certain things I don't believe. So how do I get through that? Well, that's what I'm working on. So
Sometimes it takes work. I mean,
yeah,
sometimes the song appears full and complete, bang, right there, and you can write it all down. And sometimes it takes like agony.
yeah, and that's also a part of, like, we won't really know this until literally our life has expired and we're looking down at our life review in another dimension, and we go, oh yeah, that's why it took me, 35 years to figure out that one, or
Yeah.
it's we don't know what everything truly is happening for us, not to us, even the quote unquote negative, because that's how we're if we're not given that contrast and these challenges, we can't evolve. We literally have to have these things happen in order to evolve. If there's no struggle or no impotence or no challenge, there's literally nothing that can then push you forward to get to that next level of evolution. So,
So you brought up the whole idea of negative and positive, and I've been thinking about that too, negative and positive emotions, things like that. I'm just wondering for anyone who's listening where the negative point is in a sound wave and where the positive point is in a sound wave. Like as you're thinking about the pendulum, is the negative point, where's the negative? It's like the entire arc is necessary, and yet we get all judgmental about it. We even call the bottom of a sound wave the trough, the
doesn't
peak and the
sound as
trough, right?
positive,
Right, it doesn't, right? And that's our language limiting us again.
I know.
And
And putting an opinion
yeah, throwing an
on
opinion on there,
on an objective or a subjective thing.
like the low frequency vibration. Oh, your vibration is so low. Well, damn it, I play the drums. This is the vibration I have.
A bass player, what do you
I'm a
want?
bass player. I mean, this is necessary. We need all the frequencies. You know, tune them however you like, but we need them all. So stop judging me for playing low frequencies, dude, or whoever you are that thinks that low frequencies aren't great. And
I'm
I
all
get it, I
about
get
the
it. So I get
bass.
it. Like but have you ever stood next to one of those big concert speakers with the kick drum that's amplified and felt like yourself just compress?
It's
That's pretty low
awesome.
frequency stuff, and it's happening. I don't know how many times a second, maybe twice a second if it's fast, a little less if it's slow. That's pretty low frequency, 2 cycles per second, 2 hertz,
Yeah.
and we love that stuff.
Yeah. Oh my God. Like, I mean, think about in movies, some of the best villains you've seen in a
Oh
movie,
man,
like
yeah,
they make the movie so good
yeah,
because there's such a better opponent to the hero, and it just makes the drama so much more exciting.
yeah.
And ultimately, it makes the victory for the hero in the end juicier and just more fulfilling. And yeah, and there's so much about our quote unquote darkness or shadow. Even that word, think about shadow versus the light. We're supposed to have all this light and beings of
Yeah,
light,
yeah.
which great. And I don't not resonate with that. I do. And if it's really hot out in the desert, where I'll be soon in the Sahara in freaking Egypt, guess where you're seeking refuge all day? The shade.
Shadow.
The
Yep.
shadow.
Yep.
The shadow isn't inherently, yet again, a bad thing, but language, opinion, human, opinion and construct of what something's supposed to mean, regardless of what it actually is. It's just such a we're such a polarizing, categorization type of being that just has to understand everything and has to put everything into a box and has to just like it's either this side or it's that side. You're like, how about it just is?
Yeah, yeah. And I'd rather feel good. And obviously there are emotions and states, and consciousness is all over the place. But there are better states of consciousness, that I'd rather participate in. Let's
Yep.
face it, I would choose, given the continuum, until we all reach a place where all consciousness is universal. I prefer to be on the happier side of stuff. I'll dip my toe in and I'll do shadow work and stuff like that. But if the obstacle is the way, bring on the obstacle, man. I'm not going to sit here and bemoan all the obstacles around me from the McMansion in which I've got all my toys stashed. That for me would not be consciousness,
Hmm.
right? But I will go on the journey, and it might hurt, but bring it on because I'm not willing to sit still. I guess is the thing. I'm not going to sit there. Well, the pendulum, for example, can't sit there. The pendulum is not ever going to stop going the other direction. It'll get to an infinite potential, and then it'll reverse course. And so let's reverse course frequently,
Yeah, right.
like you're doing, right? You get to that place, you go like, oh, I'm going to revisit everything.
Yeah, and that's emotions usually dictate that for me. I didn't
Truly, yes.
if I felt absolutely amazing all weekend, it wouldn't have put me into this place of like re-downloading my human design app and diving in for answers, creating a lot of silence and space to just kind of be in my own energy and thoughts for the first time this whole summer, and just have some of that time to contemplate and to kind of think about what my next move is. None of that would have come if I was feeling completely, utterly joyous all weekend. I don't think I would have gotten to that at all. You know what I mean? So it's like, even in, did I feel great over the weekend? No, I was feeling a whole mixture of emotions, but then they led me to do some things that were really good for myself. So once
Yeah.
again, it's just a constant um, journey, really. And I'm really trying to throw that judgment of, is this good or bad, or is this a
Yeah.
negative
Yeah.
or positive? I'm like, it just is.
It's
I'm
all
gonna
right.
honor it.
Yeah. And there's some pretty cool things that you can find, on the
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, and you can have an amazing experience while simultaneously feeling every emotion in the book.
Oh yeah. Well, simultaneously, like, feeling like Frodo trying to get the ring to the mountain, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
great analogy.
No, thank you, JRR, whatever your first
JR.
names were.
Yeah, all three of them. Well, it's amazing stuff, and I'd love to hear from the audience. It's a pretty philosophical conversation today. They always get philosophical, but this one I feel like a little extra so. And we dove last episode into so much amazing information thanks to Maury. I think it's nice to kind of contrast this with a more inner
Yeah,
consciousness based,
with a journey.
philosophical episode today. So that was great questions, Bill. Thanks for stimulating my brain and my emotions.
Thanks for helping me to think them through. As always, it's really great to, to resonate with this process, see what comes
Yeah,
from it.
that's why I love doing podcasts. It's like my own talk therapy.
Exactly, right. And hey, we're glad you're listening. So if you're out there listening to this stuff, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Let us know in the comments what you're feeling about all the things we're talking about today, and how do you like to navigate this reality? How do you like to navigate your emotions? How do you like to use music and sound in all of these areas? When I had my moments of quiet, I did actually go full quiet, no music, no sound, no nothing. And then after a moment or a phase of that, then I like to move into some sound and some music, and I'm picking that all very, very specifically, and I'm not thinking too hard about it. I'm feeling that, especially with music. Thank God I've been programmed from a young age to at least not have to think my way through that. I always just, what am I feeling, what am I feeling? Spanish guitar, great, you know But let us know in the comments, how do you like to integrate music into those self-care days, those days of trying to find the answers or the clarity that you need to move forward in your life? Do you, and if you do, how do you use music and sound in those moments? Because I'm sure it's all individual. I'd love to hear from you what that looks and sounds like.
Yes, and we'll give you a free gift for doing so. More podcasts like this one.
Hey.
There's your free gift.
Well, it does take us time and energy to produce these things, and we love doing it. But it's definitely nice when we get to even get the small things like a like and a subscribe and a comment. So please feel free to show your love in that and appreciation in that way, you beautiful audience. And we will continue to produce this because we love to, but we also do it because we know it has a resonating factor on you. So just let us know, give us a little feedback loop in any way you can. And we will, of course, look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Discussions of Music, Healing, and Consciousness. So thanks for joining us. And Bill, always such a pleasure. Thank you so much for the chat today.
Thank you, Chris. Always a pleasure, man. Aho.
Aho.